Sydney Hertz is a senior at Barnard College, finishing a degree in ancient studies. Her research focuses on depictions of disabled bodies in classical art and theatre using a framework of performance founded in modern disability theory. Currently, she is co-directing a Greek performance of Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus, highlighting Oedipus's embodiment as a disabled performer. In the fall, she will be joining the University of Cambridge to begin her postgraduate studies in classics. So Sydney joins us today with a paper entitled A Plea for Performativity, a study on grotesque, in quotation marks, Hellenistic sculpture and disabled performance. Take it away, Sydney.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll share my screen. Hopefully this goes well. Okay, I'm assuming that it's working. First, I'd like to thank the organizers, of course, for giving me this opportunity to present. I've been a huge Diff fan, and so to be part of this is amazing, and to be among these absolutely amazing scholars. I'd also like to thank Kyle and Hannah, of course, for this amazing conversation that y'all had on disability and antiquity and in the studies. So very excited. Before I start, I like to usually do a note on language. So as a physically disabled person, I frequently use crip as a descriptor of my work, and my research and my body. Scholar Carrie Sandall once wrote that to crip something means to examine mainstream representations or practices to reveal able-bodied assumptions and exclusionary effects. When I use it as a proud cripple and a scholar of crip studies. On a separate note on language, and like many other scholars have mentioned today, much of the scholarship in our field, even some published very recently, still use derogative terms to describe disabled people. I choose to not use this language unless quoting specific titles, which do. So initially, this paper was titled The Disabled Performer, which is very creative, but it reflects at its core what this paper is about, disabled performance, which is a term that is a conglomeration of theory and real-world practice, a term I use constantly and frequently and still struggle to truly define. The title changed once I realized what this paper really was, a desperate plea, a plea to museums, libraries, archives to treat these objects with respect and nuance. These objects, emerging in the late classical and Hellenistic periods, are figurines whose departure from the classical ideal has often been glossed as grotesque. Within these, a subcategory of dynamic and performing figures, castanet players, dancers, and actors. Their presence surprises and confuses scholarship so much so that their apparent abnormality is usually explained away as belonging to caricature and the comic stage, as pornographic, apotropaic, cultic, or at the other end of the spectrum, and ignoring their performativity completely as depictions of specific illness. Yet, still today, many might see themselves in these bodies that words have tamed or described so cruelly. And despite the popular use of the term grotesque to describe a subset of Hellenistic figurines, despite the title of the paper, which is why they're in scare quotes, it will not be used to refer to any of this study's figurative art. By necessity, it becomes more than stylistic, latching on to the real bodies with which these art forms are in conversation. It upholds a notion of kalokagathia, or relationship of aesthetic beauty and moral goodness, that harms disabled viewers and readers. Instead, these figurines will be treated with respect and their performativity taken seriously as something challenging and nuanced. In reevaluating how these figurines have been seen and understood, this study replaces grotesque to test instead the precise subcategory that is the disabled performer. In doing so, it will take disability to be broadly conceived, understanding that in their othering, all grotesque figurines are disabled by society. It dwells not only on what their bodies look like, but critically on what they do with their bodies. Sometimes this is shown still to denigrate them, having them play to an ableist tune. Sometimes it gives them an agency that stares back or rejects societal strictures. This examination will look at three objects from three major collections: the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the British Museum, and the Louvre. But before looking at these objects, it is of course crucial to establish what precisely I mean by disabled performance or disability performance theory. So this is the involvement of modern radical or critical disability studies. To understand how the disabled body is typically read, one must first understand the medical gaze, popular even now in scholarship and museum categorization. The medical model is a process by which disabled person becomes solely a biological entity, conflating disability with bodily impairment. Medicalization, the most common way in which the public reads the disabled body, upholds this impairment, or sickness even, as quintessential to the disabled existence. Through this, the disabled body is rendered as a sickness to be cured, and its identity conceived as more personal than public. In other words, the model promotes the frequently criticized individualistic property definition of disability, in which it is the property of one person. The field of disability studies, along with disability rights movements, push against this definition as lacking social awareness of how we interact with an abled world. The theoretical framework in which the objects will be studied will be through disability performance. That term, again, a model coined for this investigation to describe both how performers use their non-normative bodies to challenge ableism and ableism's oppressive stare, and the performative nature of being disabled in an abled public. Along with the preceding performative theories, disability performance includes the social model, a common model which characterizes disability as created by social condition at its most expansive, including the physical embodied experience of disability and how that may influence a body's performance. I argue that there are two main aspects to disabled performance: enfreakment and staring back. In her short piece, Staring Back, Self-Representations of Disabled Performance Artists, Thompson explores the role of performance art in appropriating and rejecting the abled stare, which evokes the question of what happened to you? A question non-normative bodies are then forced to answer, either through narrative or performance of their body. This is the stare and tell dynamic, one that is very familiar to a lot of disabled people. In reaction to this, the disabled self-performance or performance artist may use their body to manipulate this dynamic. By purposely occupying and ultimately controlling their own spaces of subjugation, their bodies become a site for rebellion, forcing the abled audience to reevaluate their role in the stare and tell dynamic. As Thompson writes, simply the presence of the visibly disabled performer on stage engenders this dynamic between the performer and her audience. This process of staring back is a result of what Thompson characterizes as a culture of enfreakment, a term originally coined by David Heavey in his 1997 publication, The Creatures Time Forgot, Photography and Disability Imagery. He explores how photography of disabled models has historically fetishized and other disabled people, as photography of disabled models um, as abled viewers internalize the difference between their normative selves or normate selves and the non-normative subject. As Heavey states, the disabled subjects, while chosen for their apparent difference, manifested body language and identity traits recognizable to everyone. Based partially in the history of the American sideshow performance, enfreakment describes a process in which a non-normative body is both turned into an object to be shown and one forced to perform. As Jennifer Eisenhower aptly describes in Just Looking and Staring Back, Challenging Ableism Through Disability Performance Art, within the sideshow, the audience is assembled before a person-made specimen to be analyzed and as a curiosity to entertain through the powerful and humanizing stare of the audience. Eisenhower's sideshow pedagogy exposes the damages of abled laughter. In this pedagogy, disabled bodies are transformed into freaks through a public dehumanizing stare or laugh, where a clear binary is created between normal and abnormal, as in a circus or sideshow. The audience internalizes the difference between their body, the normal, and the displayed body, the abnormal. This is then projected onto any public, non-normative body. With the theoretical framework, the disabled body mind can then be defined as a site of performance and a challenge to the powerful normative gaze, both on stage and off it. So actually into the slides now. One object in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art perfectly exemplifies how comic gaze extends to encompass other figures. Listed as a terracotta statuette of a mime with a shield, the body is presented by the collection as a comic character, a kind of caricature of a soldier. The mime status is attributed to the body because of its distinctive facial features, but its similarity to other mime figures stops at its baldness. Doric mime, traced back to Megara Plea in Sicily, represents a broad theatrical tradition which forms the basis for early Sicilian comedy. The form excluded a chorus, but was still overwhelmingly full of music, dance, and even acrobatics. The stories of mimes, many of which only exist in fragments, parody the mythological and powerful. Later Greek mime, known most popularly from writers Epicharmus and Herodotus, emerges in conjunction with new comedy. Both worked from Doric tradition, and the contention has always been that costume remained the same. Among all forms of mime, the most popular character archetype was the fool, whose mask was not markedly different from old comic performance, but to display a bald and very round head, large features, and a closed mouth expression with wide staring eyes. The category of the mimic fool is a convenient one for non-normative bodies, especially those with facial and bodily features that are markedly different from the classical ideal. As with comic vase paintings, seen here, features of mimic fools are internalized and used to objectify disabled bodies. This leads to the possible false classification of certain disabled figurines. By doing so, a complex figure is no longer complex. It is comedic. That is to not say that comedic figures can't be complex, quite the contrary. But once a collection slaps on the comedic label to an object and stops there, the comic gaze strips the figure of nuance and forces the body into a state of being laughed at. As for the mime figure in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, his body is emaciated, unclothed, and he has no visible genitalia. His eyes are closed, along with his mouth, and he is grimacing. It is comic for mimic fools to hold props, but typically are held in the hand that is raised. Through the comic gaze, his body is rendered laughable performer, and in turn, he is forced to perform. In the grotesque body in Greco-Roman antiquity, Tani characterizes this piece as broken in spirit and body. To Tani, this figure is humorous because of its posturing as a soldier. Through enabled gaze, his body is inherently characteresque. In The World's Stage, some observation on four Hellenistic terracotta figurines of popular entertainers, Muratov aptly ascribes performance to this figure, but while doing so compares the statuette to Isaac W. Sprague and Peter Robinson, two disabled sideshow performers of the 19th century. This is Isaac W. Sprague, a performer known as the human skeleton. He displayed his body as he was unable to work traditionally because of his chronic illness, especially when both his parents died. Sprague hated performing, especially after he nearly lost his life in one of the fires at Barnum's American Museum. But unable to support his family, he was forced to continue. In this comparison, both Sprague and the figurine are reduced to a fetishistic performance. Here, the abled gaze of scholarship quite literally forces a sideshow dynamic onto this piece. Yet, the figure's posturing makes him a soldier. One leg is raised in front, as if running. His shield is held close at his side. His other hand is open, as if grasping an object, possibly a spear that is no longer there. In this way, he reminds me more of a hoplite painting than a comic vase. Like a hoplite, the figurine is poised for battle. In doing so, it stares back, challenging the viewer to re-examine what they know about a soldier's body and how they understand power. It is far from a classical depiction of a hoplite, and that is where its power lies, in its ability to force the viewer to truly think about its body and what it is able to do with it. Is it possible that this figure is a caricaturesque depiction of a soldier? Absolutely. But when we stop there, when we stop searching and slap a comedic label onto any figurative art of non-normative bodies, we are saying that there is no place for this figurine, this body, beyond comedy. We are saying that bodies like this, like Sprague's or Robinson's, are only there for us to laugh at. Through a lens of disabled performance, this figurine becomes so much more. Comedy becomes resistance. The statuette becomes a powerful representation. The Hellenistic figurine of a dancer is dynamic, challenging the limits of its rigid medium. Despite its lack of literal movement, its expansive and artistic posturing allows it to push against the restraints of sculpture and the restrictive notions of classical beauty. Disabled self-performers transform their body into something that demands to be looked at, and in doing so, reaffirm their place in the same spaces with work to silence and subjugate them. In the same way, Hellenistic figurines of disabled dancers challenge the abled artistic gaze that defines how they must look, stand, or act. A figurine's nature, meant to be viewed in the round, challenges the nature of vase painting, which flattens limbs and strips the sense of physical robustness and dynamism. The medium of sculpture allows the performer to occupy space and to draw on scholarship on object agency here to make that space their own. Figurines that depict dancers considered sick or suffering evoke a similar process of rebellion, a process which both parallels and diverges from the one conjured by more muscular dancers. A bronze figurine of a dancer with kyphosis of the spine in the collection of the British Museum is described simply as a bronze figure of a dancing man suffering from Pott's disease. Little to nothing is said about his performance. Instead, he is his body, and his body is an amalgamation of symptoms which others believe they can explain. Even the term suffering denotes a negative medical state. The figure does nothing to express suffering. That is simply how his shape is understood as interpretation turns from artistic merit to biological reality. But what about his action? Suffering does not explain the concentration on his face as he takes a careful step in his dance. As an anatomical model, it is though he is irrelevant to art history and to the public world of ancient performance. The dancer exhibits both emaciation and kyphosis of the spine. His disablement cannot be separated from these traits, but his status as dancer must not be ignored or explained away. The man looks to his side, stepping opposite his gaze, contorting his body in the same circular way associated with other Greek dancers. The dance posturing, circular and powerful, is reminiscent of more modern traditional Greek folk dances like tsamikos or surtos, which involve creating circular chains with one another through hand holding. Tsamikos is a notoriously intense athletic dance, with performers throwing themselves acrobatically. Skill and athleticism are absolutely expressed here. Other than his cap, he is nude. Like other nude dancers, his penis is tucked, but unlike others in the category, he is not egregiously oversized. Therefore, it is unlikely that the figure is meant to be comedic and should not be characterized as so. Instead, the figure depicts the body as representative of the art form. He does not express suffering. He proudly displays his body through his exposed and welcoming dance. Typically, the classical ideal of toned, lithe bodies, reflected especially in depictions of powerful athletes, would exclude a body such as this. However, a body like this, obviously portraying medical symptoms, is still represented as capable, both physically through his posturing and socially through his status as entertainer. Rather than view the object as an image of a sick man, the figure could work to provide context to how strength and athleticism were constructed in the Hellenistic body, staring back at the classical gymnastic culture. Instead of suffering, the figure should be characterized as defiance of the classical equation of good health and a beautiful body. In her book, Bodies That Matter on the Discursive Limits of Sex, Butler clarifies the difference between theatrical performance and performativity. Performance belongs to an active subject, one who makes an intentional choice to present. Performativity is a repeated and discursive ritual process, intentional or not, which reinforces societal notions projected onto the body. In terms of disabled performance, the distinction between the two blurs. The performance of disabled bodies is not always a purposeful one, like Isaac Sprox. Objectifying theater, like sideshow, can rarely be characterized as an intentional choice on behalf of the subject. The abled gaze overpowers disabled subjects until spectacles cannot be removed from the public perception of our bodies. Therefore, disability and performance are inherently intertwined in the public sphere. In the same way, Hellenistic figurines of non-performing bodies, so figurines that exist outside of an entertainment context like actors or dancers may, construct the non-normative disabled body as still performative. Though the bodies are not sculpted as performing, their posturing places them within public performity, blurring the lines between entertainer and individual. What arises as a non-performing disabled body that is still performing? To recognize this construction, one does not need to look farther than the spinario, imagery used in representations of those with kyphosis of the spine. The most iconic spinario in the collection of the Palazzo dei Conservatori shows an idealized seated boy reaching over to pull a thorn from his foot. The design, which merges an archaic style head and a Hellenistic body, showcases a quiet yet complex beauty. The nude boy expresses deep focus. The pose is simple but displays a poised representation of real life. The spinario performs simplicity. The statue on its own challenges the viewer to ask why it's been made. It exists with no purpose, yet affirms its right to the space it takes up. Yet the presence of disabled thorn pullers gives way to a fiercer affirmation, a protest against a gaze which renders its body humorous or sick. The disabled spinarios, two of which will be put forth as exemplar, simply perform nonconformity. A bronze statue in the Wadsworth Athenaeum depicts a man, naked except for his conical cap, leaning over, concentrating on pulling a thorn from his foot. The man has kyphosis of the spine, like many other objects in this examination, emphasized by his posturing. The figure is small, measuring only 3.5 inches in height, inviting the viewer to pick it up and investigate its body. The viewer mirrors the own contemplative nature of the figure. In doing so, they interact with the body in a way that forces them to re-examine their own body as they compare themselves to the object. Another thorn puller, a bronze in the Louvre, displays a body far more detailed. Like the other, he sits bent over, leg pulled up to rest on the other. Like others in this study, he exhibits severe kyphosis of the spine along with emaciation. Still, his musculature, especially in his legs, is well defined. Though his leg is pulled up to examine his foot, his gaze lies elsewhere, catching the gaze of any viewing him from the side. His striking eyes and hollowed out pupils stare sideways. This is especially powerful considering that the figure's disablement, his kyphosis, is most visible when viewing him from the side. As the viewer stares at the body, he quite literally stares back. Both thorn pullers, though executing the same simplistic task as the Palazzo Spinario, act as a performative challenge to their normative counterpart. Their obvious bodily differences to the iconic young boy force their body into a state of spectacle, a state which the Louvre figure seems to be acutely aware of. As Lisa Trenton notes in The Hunchback in Hellenistic and Roman art, the presence of non-normative spinarios emphasizes the other. Though Trenton characterizes this as parody, it may instead be beneficial to view these objects as modes of public performativity, expressing disablement in a continuous discursive process through their posturing. They perform other in the same way the spinario performs the beautiful. Through a lens of performativity, these figurines reveal how Hellenistic sculpture constructs the disabled body as distinctly other, a state that is continuously performed by the bodies, even unintentionally. To conclude, disabled self-performers, some of many shown here, have historically used their bodies as a site of protest, a rebellion against an abled world that works so tirelessly to both hide and fetishize the disabled body. Performers control and direct the stare, reclaiming it from those who use it to subjugate them. They stand true in their rejection and affirm the space they take up in performance. The Hellenistic grotesque is a label that erases the being, rendering the body revolting, questioning its existence as a work of art. The theoretical framework of disability performance theory reevaluates how the disabled body employs performance to interrogate labels like sick, suffering, or grotesque. By examining Hellenistic figurines through this framework, the vivid and thrilling nature of these bodies is revealed. Rebellion is inherent to Hellenistic sculpture, reflected in the dynamic and emotional posturing. Hellenistic disabled performers are doubly rebellious, both in their movement and the way in which they push up against the ideal of the classical beautiful body that is upheld even today. As modern disabled performers stare back against an abled gaze that resigns them to spectacle or sickness, ancient depictions of disabled performers stare back at the classical gaze that labels them grotesque. The impulse to explain away these bodies through medicalization or vulgarity has masked the performative potential of these figures. By categorizing them as disabled performers, a space is created to discuss the construction of the body, the function of performance, and the presence of disabled bodies in antiquity. The figures are put into context of their action, not just their perceived aesthetic qualities. The category of the disabled performer is not one which is inherently positive. Performance is loaded for communities which have been forced into our entertainment. As is expressed in Eisenhower's sideshow pedagogy in Heavies and Freakment, laughter and spectacle have been employed to force disabled bodies into subservience. When scholars apply the sideshow dynamic onto ancient bodies, they give power to the fetishism, affirming its historical place as a constant and everlasting restraint on how disabled people must be perceived. However, the category of disabled performer is nuanced in that it recognizes the power dynamic between a viewer and a disabled body, while leaving space for the disabled body to grasp that dynamic and reclaim agency. As Thompson explains, staring back is a response to the questioning gaze of abled eyes, a gaze that penetrates a physically disabled body and pins it in place until it conforms to the notion of disability that have been culturally accepted. Staring back is a removal of the pins. It is the creation of a mirror. It rejects subservience, yet embraces spectacle. The disabled body is not a grotesque after art in art history. It cannot and must not be explained away with cruel terms and medical jargon. The disabled body is a musician, an actor, an artist, a thorn puller, a dancer, a scholar, and perhaps, most crucially, a performer. Thank you.